Hello everyone, thanks for joining our webinar on urban futures and resilience, organised by the International Civil Society Centre in partnership with Partos. So we'll just give you a quick couple of introductions as to who we are. So I'm Vicki. I'm the Programme Manager for Futures and Innovation at the International Civil Society Centre, and I'm joined for the introductions by Annelies from the Spindle, and Annelies will introduce Partos in a minute. So just who the International Civil Society Centre are, we're owned by 15 of the world's largest international civil society centre society organisations. And we have three main roles for the sector. So we convene leadership fora and conferences. We act as an innovation and futures aggregator and knowledge hub, within which this webinar series falls within. And we also act as a platform for collaboration for multi-ICSO projects, for instance, on inclusive SDG monitoring and implementation. That's a project called Leave No One Behind. This particular platform is called Scanning the Horizon. It's a futures and foresighting platform for global strategists working for the leading ICSOs, focusing on peer learning and trends analysis. This is our 4th year of operation, and we now have 23 members, including the ICSOs, but also national CSO platforms such as Partos. We run monthly webinars looking at, on a thematic side, such as this on urbanisation, and also looking at foresighting methods and strategy processes. And we have an annual meeting which focuses on one topic in depth, and we are going to Hong Kong next week to meet on the rise of China. So handing over to Annelies to introduce Partos.
Hi, good afternoon all. This is Annelies Kuipers from Partos and Spindle, and also Luca Volonté next to me. He's our intern. Partos is the Dutch Association for Organizations Working in International Development, and we work on three parts. It's lobby and advocacy, it's the public perception of development cooperation, and it's the knowledge and effectiveness and innovation in the sector. Since 3 years, we have started our innovation platform, the Spindle, it's called. I'm a facilitator at Spindle. And what we do there, we work on different themes, on civic power, on new ways of working together, leave no one behind and make data count. And what we try to do is to connect innovators in the sector, but also outside in, from social entrepreneurs, knowledge institutes, anyone who wants to work on developing a better world. This year we started to see on trends and innovations also what's happening in the cities of the future, because there's a lot of cities growing fast and there's so much opportunities also for the sector. We see that there's not very many NGOs in the Netherlands working on these cities, so we thought it's interesting to have some sessions as well, the webinar, but also we have future sessions coming up on cities. And on this sheet you see what kind of challenges and opportunities there are in the cities. So last time we had Paula Nagra from the Institute of Housing Studies talking about economic opportunities, and this time it will be our member of Cordaid who will talking about cities. The next slide was on the growth. You got out the sheet on Africa and the growing cities. Not too bad. This is a slide from GIZ, who is working also on cities in Germany, with all kinds of challenges you see here that NGOs and others can work on. I think it will be it, Vicki.
Great.
Go on.
So it's over to me, and I'm just going to pull up Aline's presentation and move over. So we're really pleased to be joined by Aline Rahbany, who for World Vision is the Urban Programming Advisor. Aline supports programs in strategy and capacity support for development and humanitarian responses in urban areas across the multiple countries in which World Vision works. And we are happy to hand over to you now, Aline. And again, there will be time for Q&A after the presentations.
Thank you so much, Vicki. And thanks for the opportunity to be part of this webinar, and everyone for joining. As Vicki shared, I currently work across our partnership of more than 90 countries. I support strategy and program development for programs located in cities and dealing with city challenges. And I work on building capabilities of our urban staff and strategically positioning our organization with external partners. So can I move to the next slide to give you an idea about who we are? World Vision is a Christian, child-focused, community-based organization, but we have a global presence, as I said, in more than 90 countries, and we have a staff of more than 37,000. We work in relief as well as development, and we do advocacy for policy change. At our core, we're dedicated to working with children and families and communities to reach their full potential by tackling the causes of poverty and injustice. So we focus on the most vulnerable children and the most vulnerable people in different environments. The blue dots that you see represent the countries where we have programs and operations running. So we call those field offices. And the green dots are the countries that work on generating income for our programs in the field through the child sponsorship model that we've had for so many years, and as well as through different grant programs. So these green dots are countries that build relationships with donor governments, such as in Australia, Hong Kong, UK, Canada. So these we call support offices. The orange dots are our global center offices in Monrovia and in the UK, but our international staff are located in different countries where we have presence, so they're not necessarily located in these two. Such as myself, I was part of the international team while I was living in Lebanon, and now I live in Toronto, and so we have this type of global presence among the international staff. We have a global footprint of operations, and we're strategically present in the global capitals, so Geneva, New York, where we do our advocacy to influence global discourse and policy, especially on issues affecting the rights and the well-being of children. Next slide, please, Vicki. I will talk a little bit about our urban journey. So we started our urban programming initiative in 2008 through an action learning and research initiative, and we had two objectives in mind. The first one was to understand how urban poverty and vulnerability unfold in cities, and we wanted to understand what are the negative impacts of urbanization, especially on children, and especially on children who are in less privileged areas. The second objective was to explore how the existing development models that we have, which were traditionally designed for rural environments, so we wanted to understand how they hinder us or help us but when we address urban issues affecting children. So these were the two objectives, and we decided to do a pilot in six countries. So six cities were part of this initiative, and that's where we did the action research. The cities were in Bolivia, Lebanon, South Africa, India, Cambodia, and Indonesia. We identified urban themes that we monitored across 5 years, and we had an operational research running throughout the 5 years. We wanted to also learn from external agencies. So we looked at what other INGOs and local civil society organizations are doing, as well as what are UN agencies doing to understand how they are addressing the urban issues and operating in cities, and what models do they have emerging. In 2016, at Habitat 3, we published our Making Sense of the City report, which you can find on our website. The book that we launched presents all the learning and evidence from the 6 pilot, as well as what we've been learning from other organizations and other programs that have started in World Vision since the launch of the initiative in cities. So as a result of all of this process, the Cities for Children framework emerged. This framework is our represents our urban programming approach. It presents an integrated and multi-sectoral approach for addressing the vulnerabilities of children in urban environments. I will go into it in more details during my presentation. Also, as a result of this research and learning, we developed what we call now the citywide self-sustaining model. And the Cities for Children framework is one component of this model. The model helps us maximize our contribution for a sustained impact for the lives of children in urban environments. And it helps guide our practitioners not only in knowing what to address in cities, but also how to address the issues. So operationally, how do we set ourselves to work in cities that are more dense and have more informality than rural areas and other places where we're used to work? And also, how do we fund our urban programs, given there are many assets and resources that we can capitalize on in cities? I will also go into more details about the citywide model later on in my presentation. On the next slide, I will go over what we've learned during our research and learning initiative. I'll do that very quickly. I don't want to give numbers about urbanization. We can look these up online, but I wanted to talk in a qualitative way what we have learned throughout our research. We've learned that children are the first casualty of urban vulnerability, of urban poverty and violence. We learned that NGOs that traditionally focus their attention to rural areas based on their assumption that services are already accessible and easily accessible to urban residents. Our research demonstrated that for many urban poor, the proximity to the service doesn't mean that they have access. And the urban advantage is a myth, because many urban dwellers, for example, live at 50 meters away from a hospital and still cannot access the services because they have an informal status. So it's widely acknowledged that the urban poor are continue to be excluded from political, social, and economic factors. We also learned a lot of things about the urban built environment, things related to the housing conditions, for example. Unlike in rural areas, there's insecurity of housing. Housing is more expensive. Many families sleep in rotation in overcrowded housing, and this increases their vulnerability to many risks, and such as transmittable diseases, but also other issues. And in many developing cities and cities that are in crisis, public spaces don't exist. And when they do, they are private and the urban poor are excluded. There are specific groups that are invisible in cities and they continue to be marginalized, especially if you think of displaced refugees and stateless urban residents. There also remains to be a shortage of credible data, which is needed to support program assessment and design. We also learned that the notion of community doesn't exist in the complex, dynamic, and fluid urban environment because people belong to several communities that exist simultaneously and they overlap. So a community can be built around interest, or a community can be built around practice or culture, and not necessarily a community of place that we're used to working in. So urban neighborhoods, for example, can be fragmented and diverse, and people don't feel a sense of belonging to them because they migrated to those, or they were displaced forcibly to live in these areas where they have nothing in common with others. And the last bit is about the political context. And the political context in cities is obviously very complex and challenging. There are often many actors that coexist in the city space. And the partnerships then become critical for any successful intervention. So if we want to be successful, we need to combine our knowledge and resources with partners to promote greater citywide program impact with less investment from each one. On the next slide, I will talk a bit in more details about the Cities for Children framework that I mentioned. So this is our urban programming approach. It's the organization signature integrated approach to do transformational development in stable and fragile urban areas. We developed it as a global urban team with our field offices, and we validated the approach with several field offices. It enables World Vision and partners to work together for the sustained well-being of the most vulnerable children in cities. So this was built based on the results of the research and the urban pilots, and also we've looked at evidence-based approaches developed by other agencies, UN, NGOs, and other civil society. The Cities for Children framework provides a platform in urban areas to promote child well-being outcomes, which you see in gray parts. These are the child well-being outcomes that World Vision has, global outcomes, and it allows us to contribute to those, but at the same time, it allows us to do so in a way that in speaking a language that partners can understand as well. So, for example, we can develop urban programs that contribute to safer cities and ensuring World Vision's outcome of children being protected and cared for. So the framework works at both neighborhood and citywide levels. I will go into that approach in a bit, but first I want to talk about strategic pillars and the enablers of change. So this framework responds to the specific characteristics of the populations of cities and other urban environments that we found as essential in the research that we did. So, for example, issues of density, diversity, dynamism, and mobility. We have identified 4 specific areas of transformational development that are key to address the city issues. And those areas should be intentionally included in any urban program, regardless of what development outcome we want to achieve. The first one is building social cohesion, and this is very important because urban communities are mixed and diverse and often transitory. So there's no sense of belonging, and the sense of connection is missing. And social tensions, they are prone to emerge in cities because of this diversity. So any program should build on the community and social cohesion between people that live in the area where we're doing the intervention, especially where we have slums, refugees, and other communities that are traditionally marginalized. The second one is building good governance, urban governance, and lobbying for better services in the neighborhoods and areas where most vulnerable communities live, so that we make sure that the policies that are at the city level are pro-poor, that we influence city planning and budgeting processes in the urban areas, especially where the most excluded groups live, and in a way empowering these groups to be able to advocate for their own rights in the city. Knowledge building is important because, as I said earlier, the data is an issue in urban centers. So data about urban neighborhoods becomes outdated very quickly because the city changes rapidly. So when data is available or up to date, it's often inaccurate because so many people go missing, they are undocumented, and it's difficult to find data that is desegregated by age, sex, or ethnicity, which is information that we require when we build programs to address issues of the poor. So this makes it very difficult to use the existing data for programming and policy. And in our urban programs, we need to ensure that data about the most vulnerable communities is accurate, accessible, representative, so we can leverage it to advocate for transformational change. The last bit is about the built environment, and this is the core of urban areas. This is what makes urban areas more challenging because they are dense. Infrastructure is not often conducive for the number of people who live in the city and for their well-being. The access to basic services and housing is often inadequate, and poor neighborhood and slums. Public space is a privilege, unfortunately, in many developing and fragile cities. And if we want to make the environment better and safer for children, this needs to be addressed because it has a direct link to their overall well-being, especially their mental well-being. So this is in terms of the strategic pillars, and those are important because if we don't address them, we're not relevant to the city. We're not, and addressing them will help us make more impact. There's another set of enablers of change, and these are urban advantages that if we use well, we can reach more scale. in a city. So the first one is partnerships, and I've shared earlier that many organizations are already present and operating in cities. So this provides an opportunity for building meaningful partnerships. Technology is also more accessible in cities, and through the framework we promote the use of technology and new innovation to cut costs and improve the reach to different groups wherever possible. Urban planning and design can be a problem and a solution in cities. So we want to make sure that the urban planning and design are being able to be influenced by people who are not usually included in these processes. And we want to make sure that the process usually listens to the most vulnerable communities and that the solutions are sensitive to their needs. And urban policy, finally, is often missing at the national level, and cities' master plans are developed by experts, often giving little regard to the urban residents' needs or opinions. So especially if those live in slums and informal neighborhoods, they are excluded of the process. And the urban policy can then be a tool for us to ensure that that there is more equity by involving them in the process. On the next slide, I will go. So I've covered the Cities for Children framework, which is the urban programming aspect of the citywide self-sustaining model that I mentioned. The city model has two other components relating to operations and to resourcing. I will not go into those in details, but I will give a bit on some of the aspects of the model in general. So what we've discovered through our urban pilots is that it's not enough to focus our intervention at the neighborhood level if we want to achieve sustainable impact in cities. We need to work at multiple levels and multiple tiers and influence policy at municipality and city and national levels. And I will give an example of that in a bit. So the model is designed in a way to work at the neighborhood, municipality, and city levels. We also learned that we cannot address all the issues that children face, but we have to make strategic choices and be focused on delivering quality according to our capability. So this helps build the credibility and facilitates the process of developing partnership across the city with different urban actors. So partnering is essential, and it will help us reach scale and sustainability of our effort. Building networks and joining alliances is something that we need to do more in cities because it allows for generating greater resourcing and programming and policy influence. Cities come with advantage. In many cities, there is, so for example, a city can be located in a fragile area, and at the same time, it could have a good economic rating. For example, in Honduras, Pedro Sula contributes to more than 60% of the national GDP. So there are local resources and assets that we can capitalize on. And this links to the diversification of funding, which can be an asset for urban programs. And last I want to say is that we are required to be more agile in cities because the change happens much faster than in rural areas. And so we require staff to be more flexible and with a skill set that allows shifting operation modes when the context changes. On the next slide, this is what I talked about earlier. So there are multiple tiers of engagement in the city, and our role can change depending on where we are and what are we influencing. So the urban program approach identifies three complementary roles that World Vision can play, and the three roles link World Vision to bottom-up community participation and top-down policy influence through a networking and partnership approach. At the bottom-up level, our role as community mobilizer helps us work directly with the children, youth, families, and community leaders at the neighborhood level. So that's the level where we implement our interventions, regardless of their outcomes. At the program broker and monitor level, this is where increasing our reach and impact of urban programs is done by better connecting civil society organizations, government agencies, and other actors in cities. So in a way to be open and collaborative to reach a larger population of most vulnerable children. And at the strategic...
Sorry, just to interrupt. people seem to be having audio issues.
Can you hear me?
I can, yeah. Okay, everyone can hear again, so it's fine. Sorry to
Okay.
yeah, carry on, sorry.
No worries. So the last one was at the strategic facilitator level. This is where we play a catalyst role to bring diverse range of urban actors from multiple sectors and disciplines. So this is where we reach out to private sector, to the media, to businesses, in a way to develop a shared vision for child well-being, to allow us to impact the investment on for the well-being of the most vulnerable children, and doing joint action with various stakeholders. So the three roles complement each other, and a citywide program requires us to act on all levels. And this has, of course, implications on organizational structures and procedures and policies and staff capacity. I will move on to the next slide, and this is the one before the last. I will give one example from India. This is where we have one of our urban programs applying elements of the city model, the Safer Delhi program. This is part of India's My City initiative, which runs across 7 cities. It works, we identified in New Delhi that the safety of children and youth, especially girls who are 12 to 18, as a major issue. And the local police were keen to engage children and youth in slum areas in Delhi to identify the crime and solutions to address safety concern. So in response, World Vision India launched a collaboration with local police. One of the programs was to select and train 10 female youth leaders in self-defense programs, and in turn, the trained young people were able to transfer their skills to 56 girls through various programs, including arts, culture, theater, and mime, aiming mainly to raise awareness among their peers and communities on issues of gender, exclusion, urban violence, and safety. So this training of trainer pilot initiative led to its scale up with over 2,000 girls and young women who are now trained as certified trainers. And because of the success of this, the Department of Education has invited the Safer City initiative in Delhi to operate through 485 schools across the city, which led to more interest and media coverage. And the World Vision India has been invited by the Transport Department of the New Delhi to apply for a grant to train young girls from this program to seek livelihood opportunities as drivers of female use only buses. So the program success also supported advocacy efforts to integrate a gender-based approach into city policies and programs, which led to improvement of the city's physical environment for females. So you can see in this example how a small neighborhood initiative has reached a citywide scale through the right partnerships built, and how the issue of safety is being addressed through a multi-sectoral approach. And the last slide is about an example that I want to share. Sorry, no, it's the next one. An example from San Pedro Sula. San Pedro Sula was the most violent city in the world between 2011 and 14. And in Honduras, this is where we're testing a new approach in World Vision to work in fragile context. And we want to make sure it works in cities by aligning it with the citywide model. The idea is to design a program that's able to shift quickly in modes of operations, from saving lives to promoting longer-term sustainable development based on the changes in the context. So the program is not only built based on the needs assessment and scanning of city issues and opportunities that are happening now, but we also analyze possible scenarios of where the situation might deteriorate or improve and require different intervention, and we actually detail what we will do in case the situation changes and how our intervention will change. What will make this program work is the continuous context monitoring to identify the changes that are required for adaptation of our programming. The program for the current scenario is supporting the urban residents, especially young people and families, in 5 of the most marginalized neighborhoods in San Pedro Sula, to build social cohesion and resilience in a way to adapt to their current conditions. As you all know, there is the issue of migration migration and the migrant caravans, and people are leaving because of the situation that they live in. So we want to build their resilience and make sure they have the opportunities where they live. So this is supported by working through local churches in the neighborhoods, but also with the city government, with private sectors across the city, and with the media in different capacities, to ensure there's investment in program and resources in the neighborhoods that are most marginalized. I will stop here. I think I went over time. I'm sorry about that. I'm happy to answer any questions you have. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Aline. Are there any quick questions immediately that anyone has for Aline? Otherwise, we'll see if there's time at the end of Peter's presentation for them both to take some questions as well. So there's nothing in the chat. I think there's enough of us, but if you want to ask something, you can just unmute. Okay, I can't see anyone doing that immediately, so thank you. I think we'll move straight on to Peter's presentation, and then we'll come back to any further questions later. So the second presenter is Peter Gijs van Enk, who is Cordaid's expert on urban resilience, providing programme support on the theme, especially for the urban poor. So Peter, please take it away.
Yes, good afternoon, or good morning to maybe other people. This is Peter Gijs van Enk, indeed working for Cordaid since the start of this year on the subject of urban resilience, which I'm going to share a bit of background on. I personally have a background in urban planning and working in NGO world for quite some time on the largest subject of urban development. I've been focusing on water, sanitation, housing, and now more on the urban resilience issues. So I will talk you through my presentation. I think I have to skip through a number of slides, also looking at the time that we have. So maybe we can go to the third slide. Yeah, that's Cordaid. So Cordaid, yeah, that's okay. And Cordaid is a Dutch NGO, already a long-standing Dutch NGO, focusing on fragility. It's on helping people to build flourishing communities in fragile context and conflict areas. We do that in, you see the most important countries that we're focusing on are Myanmar, Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and then in the center of Africa, we work in a couple of countries. We do that in 5 thematic areas. An important one is, of course, providing humanitarian aid. We work on the subject of health. We work on creating good jobs, so private sector development. We work on security and justice, on promoting security and justice, and that's my thematic area or my department, which is building resilience. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Yes, so resilience is of course a word or a theme that a lot of organizations are working on, that we hear yeah, often these days. For Cordaid, the goal of our Resilient Communities program is to assist vulnerable people and communities to become more resilient to disasters and risks. And in that process, we try to enable livelihood security, peace dialogue, and sustainable economic growth. We do that through our own programs, but we also work in collaboration with our Partners for Resilience Alliance, which is a Dutch alliance of NGOs consisting of Cordaid, the Netherlands Red Cross, the Red Cross and Red Crescent Climate Center Care, and Wetlands International. Yeah, we can go to the next slide. Yeah, we have to click through here a couple of times. Yeah, thank you very much. So when talking about resilience, there's 4 important things we want to achieve, or which we want to improve. That communities can anticipate on the risk they are facing, that they are, in case when disaster strikes or when things happen, that they are capable of responding. Thirdly, that they also can adapt to risks, or that they can adapt to changing risks, so that they can be better prepared in that way. And also that systems and structures, where necessary, can be transformed. in order to address underlying factors and other causes. And when looking at the more urban component of that, or the urban resilience component there, that's where, through our project, we try to support the poor and most vulnerable in urban areas to resist, absorb, accommodate, and recover from hazards and stresses. And we try to do that through a process in which we address underlying factors and root causes. Can we go to the next slide? So in our resilience work, and that's not only for the urban resilience activities that we're doing, but in the wider resilience activities that Cordaid is implementing, we apply the resilience framework. For us, the most important counterparts, so to say, are the communities. So these are the people in the circle at the top. On the side, you see the hazards. It illustrates how the hazards influence the system they are in. The people at the communities, they are supported through a number of layers in the framework. Of course, first of all, there's the basic needs which need to be in place for them to become more resilient, what needs to be supported. Then there is a layer of livelihoods which they would also need, would also be, if we work on them, you can also improve resilience. Of course, then there's the ecosystems in which they live, which also are influencing the level of resilience. Then there is the community structures and systems in terms of like education or health or other support that also influence the status of resilience. And then there is the layer of an enabling environment or international programs or international agreements, which also influence and which can contribute to the building of resilience. So in our work, which, as I indicated before, is particularly focusing on communities, we are looking for interventions which can be in one of the layers or which can be in various layers, and as such jointly work towards improved resilience of communities. We can go to the next slide and then the next one as well. As Aline already mentioned, like all the data, we all know that how urban development or urbanization is changing the world that we're currently living in. We also know that especially people living in poor urban neighborhoods get faced with a lot of the burden of urbanization in general and limited infrastructure and so on, but particularly nowadays also with increasing disaster risks due to climate change and environmental degradation. And that influences their lives, of course, negatively, and that also reduces their capacities to deal with that. So this is the most important focus of our urban projects. Can we move to the next slide? Can we click 2 more times? Thank you. So in our approach that Cordaid has been developing in the past years, also based on our longer experience in the field of urban development and working through partners on urban development, we work with a theory of change that basically says that in an urban area, there's so many different actors working together and also working apart from each other, that what we see is that if we make sure that we work and that relevant stakeholders are working together and also jointly set their priorities and develop an agenda, we believe that by promoting that engagement, by promoting that collaboration, we can identify all kinds of solutions that reduce risk and also makes use of the capacities that they all have. And if we manage to do so, then we see that urban communities can become more resilient to disasters, which will then also save lives and livelihoods and will lead to increased disaster resilience in those neighborhoods. And what we, of course, there stress is that even though as an outsider NGO we try to facilitate these processes, the residents and all kind of other stakeholders in those areas, in those urban areas, do know themselves very well what the situation is, what their priorities are, what their capacities are, also what they can contribute and what they would like to contribute and how they can contribute. And in creating that shared understanding and creating that shared agenda and putting in the various inputs that they can contribute, we work on a solution that is can help in increasing resilience. Can you move to the next slide? Yeah, then two more. Yeah, that's it. Thanks. And as I said, like by looking into local solutions and having local stakeholders jointly developing an agenda, we hope to support and build local ownership. So it's communities, it's government organizations, but also private sector partners that work together, and hopefully also set up a platform in which they jointly work on risk analysis and develop actions to counter these. Through that local ownership, we make sure that groups are engaged. So the groups we already mentioned, but also specific groups, that women groups, we talk about elderly, teenagers, and together they can work on smart solutions where sometimes external expertise can help, and which also is intended to be scaled to other areas. So either replicated to other neighborhoods in the same city, or we work on knowledge exchange or exchange visits between our projects or between various partners, so that we can show how the approach, how experience from one area could possibly of use also and of inspiration in other areas. Move to the next slide. The process that this is the process that we apply in our projects, and this is, of course, this is not a blueprint, so not, even though we try to follow it, of course every situation is different, but this is a good way of illustrating how our train of thought is, how we try to address it. So we have I will quickly go through the 5 most important steps. So the first step is that, as I mentioned already before, where the stakeholders jointly work on a urban risk appraisal. So in the urban area, jointly people are identifying the risks and also possible solutions for that. They describe that in the second step in a common agenda, and also most importantly in a community action plan. So as I mentioned also before, that the various stakeholders identify what they can contribute, what they would like to commit themselves to, and we also stimulate that through a number of tools. Then in the third step, that's where this platform that I've been talking about, where those stakeholders work in, and through which they try to implement the community action plan. We support that through, well, strengthening the collaboration. Some capacity building activities can be done there, and also in terms of resource mobilization, it's an important step, because we are looking how other partners, apart from the stakeholders themselves, can also contribute to implementing the action plan. And that's then happening in the fourth step. That can be a wide range of activities, but these are based on the action plan defined by the stakeholders. And ultimately, we also hope that the examples developed in the communities, in, let's say, at the lowest local community level, can also be replicated or taken up by, for example, municipal authorities, or by other projects or other authorities. And in that sense, we try to spread the message and try to replicate what has been taking place in the areas that we're working in. Okay, can we go to the next slide? As I said already, in the first step, we work on community disaster risk mapping. I think it's not a unique thing, because there's plenty of other NGOs that are working using these tools. However, I'm always when I see, this is a picture from Myanmar, which was shared last week, where we work in Yangon. It's almost a piece of art which people are actively putting into, like this is community people presenting the results of their the risk mapping in their community, in their neighborhood. So each of the houses represents one household, and based on the initial hazard and risk mapping, they identify how they are affected by that risks. And that's an important first step in the working out of a action plan, and where we also, of course, with support of our team in the field, where they would like to put their priorities and where they would like to work on. The second tool, you can go to the next slide, is related to the second step and the third step also, where I indicated that when partners and stakeholders work together, that's of course a great idea, but if you are at the table with a community member, with a municipal officer, a private sector partner, not all of them may be equally confident, so to say, to start discussions with other stakeholders. So we try to promote collaboration, understanding, also confidence of those various stakeholders, for example, by playing so-called games. Serious games is also a commonly known approach, but Cordaid has developed a couple of games which are used in urban resilience projects. So we have a collaboration game which very much focuses on stimulating collaboration and cooperation. And secondly, we also developed a planning game which then can be later on used in developing the already mentioned community action plans. You can go to the next slide. But I think I will skip this one, but then you have to go through a couple of times. Yeah, one more time. So if we work on specific measures, so smart solutions, then that the community is implementing, then there's a couple of key characteristics that we have identified in the past couple of years. They should be hazard specific and context specific. So that means that in every country there can be a different solution again, or a different prioritized solution or measure. It's very much tries to integrate environment, infrastructure, and livelihoods. So sometimes you may wonder, okay, what does this have to do with natural hazards or something like that? But we think that's also looking at livelihoods, and in that sense also contribute to resilience, can also improve resilience. The third one is that it definitely should be embedded in community and also government structures and systems. In that sense, the platform and the collaboration between the stakeholders, where they also exchange ideas and where they also explain to each other where their priorities are, should contribute to that. And of course, most of all, we are working in the most vulnerable areas, in most vulnerable urban areas, and in that sense also the solutions that we are working on should be affordable for the urban poor. Can we go to the next? So we are working, for example, in Jakarta already for quite some time, for 5 years. This looks very formal and very neat. This is also a resettlement area where people from informal areas in Jakarta were moved to a couple of years ago. However, with moving houses, moving of jobs didn't happen. So maybe you can click one more time. Yeah, so we used that combination or like that situation to set up a the Marunda Urban Resilience in Action platform, which brings together people from living in those the flats you see in the background, as well as people in the same area living in informal settlements, and which are dealing with flooding and which are dealing with uncertainty in terms of, for example, job opportunities or income generation. And based on a participatory risk mapping, a couple of risks were identified. And in that platform, in which not only the community is represented, but also private sector, as well as government organizations, a number of specific activities were identified and also implemented to improve resilience in that area. And what you see here in the foreground of the picture is, for example, is urban farming activities. There is a lot of space, so to say, and in that sense, you have an opportunity. There's a capacity in the area to promote livelihoods. So there's at the various locations on the site, there are quite extensive urban farming activities which provide food security, but also income generation for the participants. And what is very interesting here is that the government of Jakarta, which is the province of Jakarta, became very interested because they were involved in the process also, but became very interested in the approach and has asked the platform as well as some of the partners in the platform to participate in designing Jakarta's multi-annual strategy on food security, which is to include urban farming as well. So that's a good example of how a small-scale community-based initiative, which focuses on increasing resilience, is also replicated or taken up by higher-level authorities and considered a good addition to the larger city development. And as such, it's a very positive development. I have a couple of slides with a couple of other projects, but I will skip through them. Maybe you can go to Ivory Coast, which is that one. Yes, thank you. Sorry, can we go back? Sure, Sierra Leone is next door. Freetown, Sierra Leone, which is in Africa, where we work in the Tower Hill catchment area, which is geographically a totally different scale from the Indonesia project. While in Indonesia we work basically in one community, this is a project that works in 14 communities. But the most interesting thing is here that we work in we try to work in the catchment area, because people living upstream, up in the hills, are related to the people living in the middle of the hill, so to say, and also the people living downstream at the sea level. And here we try to also set up a platform. So here we support a platform which all those communities start talking to each other, and where they try to define activities and interventions that can increase their resilience, not only for one community, but especially for the whole of the catchment area. So that in case of any problems or any disaster or any hazard, also the platform in which they communicate with each other can help in increasing, improving their preparedness and so on. It's also interesting here already that the catchment is a missing link between the community level, the real community level, as well as the city scale. So we try to make that link between those two levels, and as such, we also see it as an opportunity to contribute to the larger Freetown Transform initiative, which is an initiative by the Freetown City Council. And which is indeed focused on resilience building and disaster preparedness. And by supporting this catchment area, we can make an important step towards improved resilience in the urban area of Freetown. I want to conclude, and I see it's to a number of challenges and success factors. So the challenges that we particularly see is that when you work with all those different stakeholders at in different parts of society, with different capacities, with different ideas and different priorities also, you need time to build trust among themselves. Only when there is trust, people are willing to open up, and people are willing to negotiate, people are willing to discuss with each other, and are willing to, I guess, to come to agreements. So that is an important thing. That is also, of course, different in every context. We cannot simply say, okay, this is the process that we use, and we're going to copy and paste it in every context where we are starting. So that means that we will have to adjust that based on the context. And maybe because of that time that is necessary, funding is also sometimes difficult. There is we have only for a limited amount of time, so we have to, for every situation, we have to look into different funding solutions. Maybe the final bit, can we do one more click? Yeah, and then the success factors, as I mentioned, time is important, so time can also be an important factor for success, and also therefore the funding is important. we work on resilience on a local level, on the community level. So when talking about funding, it's very beneficial if also funding, for example, from authorities is available in a decentralized level. We also need capacitated staff, and I think also Aline already mentioned that to facilitate these processes. So that's also an important point of to people need to be capable of engaging communities or building trust as well. But yeah, to also prevent it from becoming maybe too theoretical or too well, not tangible or something, because it takes time. We have to also definitely look into those resilience measures and facilitate a process where these measures are always an important point at the horizon, so to say, to work towards, because that's giving good examples of how the process can contribute, and also that it can be replicated to other areas. And once these are in place, it's important that these are also used to celebrate the results of collaboration. And that's also what we're going to do next week. I will not be there myself, but in Myanmar, we're opening up a small water supply, clean drinking water unit in the area, which was considered an important challenge in the area, and that will be also that will be a great opportunity also to show what collaboration can result in increasing living conditions and increasing resilience in those urban vulnerable communities. And that's where I guess I will leave it. Thank you. Sorry it took a bit of more time.
No, thank you. I think it's worth taking that time. I'd really like to thank both speakers, both for your insights on the complexities and the challenges, but also for the really exciting and inspiring examples of how you've been able to achieve scale up from the kind of small scale community level to citywide. And I think it's great to see that in both cases. We have a specific question from Alberto for you, Peter, which is can you expand a bit more on the serious games, because that's an interesting tool, particularly who created them, who's participating, what kind of outcomes do you get from them, and whether they're available for others to use as well, please.
Well, I was 2 weeks ago, I was in Jakarta where we played those games. It was merely a training session, but to give you a bit of background, so those games were developed by Cordaid and a game developer, so that's a company that develops games. But Cordaid asked that company to develop the two games that I have explained about. And if I look back, like in a theoretical situation, but yeah, for example, Jakarta, which was a specific case there, if you would look at the collaboration game, it would be a collaboration game in which basically all stakeholders that are somehow present in a certain area and which are interested in joining in this initiative to improve urban resilience would be sitting at that game board. So you would talk about community members, you would talk about other NGOs, for example, you would talk about the private sector, you would talk about the government involved. You could even have private sector on the one hand basically being entrepreneurs or something like that, and on the other hand you would also have maybe project investors or something like that. So it would be a diverse group of stakeholders who are somehow all capable of contributing to increasing resilience, and all have a certain capacity, whether it's knowledge, whether it's money, or whether it's policies or whatsoever, to bring to the table. And then by playing the game, and which is really a game, you can start or you can promote negotiations, you can promote collaboration, and that can then result in the first important step, that people already feel more comfortable. And you cannot say that by the end of playing each game you will have the same outcome, because it really depends on the dynamics in the game and by the people sitting around the table. But in general, we can say that where we have tried those games, and it's not only in Jakarta but also in other countries, that you can see that it has very much contributed to well, creating confidence and also what's the word? That people, yeah, basically trust between maybe also stakeholders, that's community members that didn't dare to speak up or speak out towards a city authority representative, and now they were playing a game around the table, and there they learned that they could and that they can be open to each other. So that's a very positive feedback.
Great, thank you. And we have another question from Miriam as to whether the approach and the solutions are different when you apply them in an urban setting compared to a rural setting.
Well, it's like I think that there is, of course, different settings. One of the things, I guess, and that's maybe also something that Aline already mentioned about, is that in an urban area we are working together. That it's much dense. That's physically. It's like there's I think there's also many more stakeholders. There can be many more stakeholders involved. Which means that you would have more complex negotiations or would have more complex collaborations. And also, I think the context can change more rapidly, or if there's any change in the context, it may have implications for many different factors in a process. So in that sense, if I would have to describe, I guess, what would be the difference, I think that if things change in an urban area and an urban collaboration, an urban project, then things can change on many more different component factors at the same time. And that requires a more, let's say, we have to be on top of things and be able to indeed also facilitate those changes in a way that the process can continue and that in the end resilience will be achieved.
Yeah, I think that's something that really struck me actually, is like the time that is needed to build the trust and the relationships with multiple stakeholders, but also the speed of the context changes, which Aline also brought across. We have one final question, which is how you engage the private sector in the funding of urban programs.
Well, that's a good question, Suman. Thanks for that. At the moment, the projects that we're currently implementing are indeed locally, based in urban communities in those 4 cities that I only introduced 2 of them. For each of the projects, also private sector is invited to join into the collaborations. And for example, in Jakarta, that's where an important, it's a seed producer that's actively involved in the whole urban farming project, and they are providing funds as well as materials and seeds to promote to support the urban farming initiative. So in that sense, we look into opportunities per identified solution or identified risk, and then see how the private sector can be involved in that. Of course, you could try to set up other things, maybe public-private partnerships from the outset, where already private sector commits itself to a larger share, but that's something that's still what we are investigating and what could possibly come up in the future. But at the moment, we're looking for specific examples, specific opportunities within the context that we're working on, and in that sense, try to include the private sector.
That's great. Thank you so much all for your interest and your questions, and again to the 2 presenters. What we will do is we will share the recording with you, and if you have any more questions that you would like us to pass on to the presenters, we'll be happy to do that. So thanks again, and we're signing off now. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.